Imagine this scenario. You are at an altitude of 8,300 meters. It is the middle of the night and you have absolutely no sleeping bag. For most, that is a death sentence. But for Maurice and Liliane Barrard, known famously as the world's highest couple, this terrifying situation wasn't some tragic accident. It was actually a calculated part of their strategy. Back in the summer of 1986, on the brutal, unforgiving slopes of K2, they were gambling everything they had. They decided to challenge the death zone with a radical approach, betting their lives on speed and ultralight gear. But why would the absolute elite of the mountaineering world violate the number one rule of survival, essentially signing their own death warrants? This is the story of what happens when reckless human courage crashes headfirst into the icy void of eternity. That specific summer, the mountain claimed 13 of the planet's very best climbers. They would never return home. The year is 1986, and K2, rightfully known as the Savage Mountain, has stopped forgiving even the smallest mistakes. Let's take you down to base camp, resting at the foot of the second tallest peak in the world. You can feel it in the air. There is a strange, heavy energy here. The campsite is crowded with tents packed cheek by jowl. You can hear a dozen different languages being spoken, and the atmosphere is thick with raw ambition and adrenaline. Never before in history has this brutal pyramid of rock and ice witnessed such a massive crowd. But beneath all this colorful chaos and excitement, a grim reality is forming. A dark statistic is quietly taking shape. This climbing season will not go down in the history books as a glorious triumph of the sport. Instead, it will be remembered forever as the Black Summer. And standing right at the center of this unfolding tragedy are two specific figures. They look completely different from the usual crowd of gritty, bearded loners. Meet Maurice and Liliane Barrard. They are French, stylish, and they stand out. They are beautiful, radiating confidence, and totally inseparable. The newspapers and their eager sponsors have already branded them with a catchy nickname, the world's highest couple. To them, it seems that climbing these deadly peaks isn't a desperate struggle for survival, but looks more like a romantic Sunday stroll that just happens to be at extreme altitude. Just take a close look at their equipment. It is shockingly minimalist. You won't find any bulky, heavy oxygen tanks here. They are true believers in the alpine style. It is a bold, dangerous philosophy. You move fast, you travel light, and you rely entirely on your own lung capacity and foot speed. It is elegant and pure, but the Barrards believe in one core truth: speed equals safety. The theory is simple. If you are fast, you spend less time exposed in the danger zone. But K2 has a different plan. Right now, with the sun blazing down on the snow, nobody suspects that the loss of this celebrity couple will come to symbolize the end of an era. It was a time when we foolishly thought that love and a lightweight backpack were enough to shield you from the ruthless elements at 8,000 meters. Watch them as they check their bindings, flashing bright smiles for the news cameras. There isn't a trace of fear in their eyes, just pure, unadulterated excitement. They have no idea that the mountain has already set its traps for them, and the countdown to the devastating Black Summer has officially begun. Have you ever tried to talk down a furious teenager who has absolutely zero respect for authority? Maurice Barrard does that for a living every single day. In his ordinary life, far away from the freezing gales and ice, this quiet man with the weather-beaten face works as a youth worker. His clients are the kids society gave up on, troubled teens from the wrong side of the tracks who have nowhere else to go. It is the kind of job that can grind your spirit down faster than climbing Mount Everest ever could. But that profession is exactly what gave Maurice his greatest weapon, a level of patience that is almost inhuman. Just look at him in the footage. Amid the absolute chaos of base camp, with people screaming over routes, pots and pans clattering, and the wind trying to rip the tents apart, Maurice is completely zen. Years of managing other people's anger and pain have taught him the art of waiting. He can shut down a heated conflict with nothing more than a single quiet glance. Up here in the death zone, where panic is a guaranteed death sentence, his mental fortitude is worth more than the warmest down jacket money can buy. He treats the mountain just like he approaches a difficult client. It is temperamental and dangerous, sure, but it is something you can understand if you just listen closely enough. Maurice is the bedrock of their partnership, the public face, and the voice of reason. But look just over his shoulder. Standing there, often hidden in his shadow, you will see a petite figure. That is Liliane. If Maurice is the soul of the team, then Liliane is undeniably its body and its mechanic. She is a physical therapist by training. She understands the human body inside and out. While other climbers are playing guessing games about whether their bodies can handle the strain, Liliane knows for a fact. She can sense the limits of every muscle, fiber, and sinew. She serves as the expedition's doctor and chief diagnostician, keeping them running like machines. Her backpack is always assembled with the obsessive precision of a field medic, where every single gram is counted and justified. To the press and their sponsors, Liliane often fades into the background behind her charismatic husband. Journalists love interviewing Maurice because he waxes poetic, speaking beautifully about the spiritual nature of the mountains. Liliane, on the other hand, is silently in the corner checking the gear. But don't let that modesty fool you. Inside this seemingly fragile woman burns an ambition hot enough to melt a glacier. She isn't just tagging along for the ride. Liliane is chasing a relentless personal goal of her own. She is obsessed with becoming the first woman to reach summits where no other woman has ever stood before. She is determined to prove to the world that women's mountaineering is not some secondary discipline. Her drive is the rocket fuel that powers their duo. Maurice provides the stability. Liliane sets the aggressive pace. It is a perfect symbiosis. You have his social worker's composure, mixed with her medical precision, all amplified by a thirst for world records. They seem invincible, like two halves of a whole purpose-built to survive in the most extreme conditions on Earth. It seems they have accounted for every variable, from their mental fortitude to their physical conditioning. But here's the funny thing, the person you are destined to conquer the world with might, at first, not even let you on the team. And that is exactly how their story begins way back in 1973. Let's journey back 13 years to the rugged, high-altitude landscapes of the Peruvian Andes. Here, Maurice Barrard is the undisputed authority, the stern leader of the expedition. He looks at a young Liliane Bontemps and sees, well, anything but a partner for taking on the peaks. For him, she is just a tourist. Maurice delivers a blunt verdict right to her face. You will come with us, but just for the trekking. No serious climbs for you. He actually draws a safe route for her on the map, reserving the real mountains for the main squad. It was the classic male confidence of that era. A woman on an expedition was seen as a liability, someone who needed to be protected. But Liliane doesn't waste breath arguing. She simply shoulders her pack and hits the trail. And this is where Maurice's preconceptions begin to shatter. While the big tough men are gasping for air on the steep inclines, fighting the thin Andean oxygen, Liliane maintains a relentless, steady pace. She never drops a single step behind the group. Where the others are demanding a rest, she is already checking the map for the next waypoint. Her endurance proves to be phenomenal, and her technical work with the gear is impeccable. Watching her, Maurice has a surprising realization this woman needs absolutely no protection. At some point, it suddenly dawns on him that she is actually tougher than many of the men in his group. The skepticism in his eyes gives way to deep respect. He is no longer seeing just a travel companion, but an equal partner, someone who can endure hardship and the freezing cold without uttering a single complaint. This trial by fire in Peru is what forges the foundation of their bond. 4 years later, in 1977, they make it official and become husband and wife. But this is no ordinary marriage. Their home in the quiet village of Francourville loses all sense of cozy domesticity. You can forget about soft couches and flowers on the windowsill. Their home is transformed into a full-blown training camp. The walls are practically plastered with topographic maps of the Himalayas and the Karakoram Range. The corners of the room are crammed with coils of rope carabiners and ice axes. The kitchen becomes a laboratory for calculating calories for future treks, and the living room serves as their mission planning headquarters. The Barrard's life now revolves entirely around a single consuming purpose: the mountains. They live in a state of constant readiness, where every single day is just prep for the next record attempt. Their neighbors see a normal couple, but behind closed doors in Francourville, the world's highest couple is being forged, preparing to challenge any summit on Earth. Trying to conquer the most dangerous peak in the world while dragging an entire city behind you, it is an absurd task, but a very real one. This is exactly what the French national expedition to K2 in 1979 looks like. And Maurice Barrard isn't just another climber on this trip. He is a major figure, the head of the elite Himalayan section of the French Alpine Club. He is a man who plays by the old school rulebook, and those rules declare you wear the mountain down. It is a strategy known as a siege. You can just picture it, an endless snake of people winding its way to the base of the mountain. Just think about the sheer numbers, hundreds, even thousands of porters. They are hauling tons of gear on their backs, everything from heavy oxygen cylinders to folding furniture and crates of gourmet food. This looks less like a feat of athleticism and more like a military operation to seize territory. The logic of a siege is simple. You lay down miles of fixed ropes, establish a chain of camps, flood the mountain with gear, and then slowly, step by step, you basically push someone to the top. But K2 just laughs at this lumbering armada. The whole bureaucratic machine starts to break down. The sheer number of people creates absolute chaos, not safety. Orders get lost down the chain of command, cargo gets bogged down on the lower slopes, and the weather shifts faster than this huge expedition can even move a tent. Maurice sees it with his own eyes. This giant machine of an expedition is choking on its own weight, and the mountain has no patience for delay. The French team, for all its immense resources and ambition, fails spectacularly. They retreat without ever reaching the summit. For Maurice, it is a brutal wake-up call. He realizes that the system he had devoted himself to is broken. It is obsolete. While all this is unfolding, look over at the neighboring summit. There is a solitary figure up there who is completely dismantling the established playbook of high-altitude mountaineering. His name is Reinhold Messner. Hailing from the rugged Tyrolean mountains, he is achieving what medical science claimed was suicide, scaling the world's 14 highest peaks, the 8,000ers, without a single canister of supplemental oxygen. He moves with a shocking lightness, carrying almost nothing, treating a death zone ascent like a casual Sunday run. Through his actions, he is screaming a new truth to the world. When the air is this thin, your only armor against the grave is pure, unadulterated speed. Maurice watches Messner's sleek efficiency and then glances back at his own expedition. It feels like comparing a sports car to a sinking ocean liner. He was trapped in a clumsy bureaucratic beast of a climb weighed down by endless logistics. The difference isn't just visible, it is visceral. A light bulb goes off in Barrard's mind. He understands now that heavy oxygen cylinders aren't a lifeline. They are heavy anchors dragging you into the snow. And that army of climbers surrounding you, it's a mirage. It looks like safety, but it's just a traffic jam waiting to happen in the death zone. In that moment, the tectonic plates of his philosophy shift permanently. He makes a silent vow to himself, never again. He refuses to be merely a nameless gear in a massive industrial-sized climbing machine. From this day forward, he is dedicating himself to the purity of alpine style. No armies, no fixed ropes, no heavy infrastructure. It will be just a tiny, agile squad, only him and the few souls he would trust explicitly with his survival when the chips are down. Upon touching down in France, he is a man possessed by a new vision. He begins a ruthless process of elimination, stripping away every single ounce of non-essential weight to unlock absolute freedom of movement. Consider the physics of the high peaks. A standard parka might weigh 3 kilograms at sea level, but in the oxygen-starved exhaustion of 8,000 meters, that same jacket feels like a crushing 30-kilogram lead vest. Up there in the death zone, every superfluous gram transforms into a boulder tied around your neck, actively trying to pull you into the abyss. Maurice Barrard grasps this concept with a clarity that borders on obsession. Following the disaster of the heavy-handed military-style expedition, he confronts a harsh reality about the mountaineering industry. The equipment available in stores is laughably inadequate for what he plans to do. It is heavy, inefficient at retaining heat, and designed for weekend tourists skiing in the Alps, not for the gladiators fighting for survival in the vertical arenas of the Himalayas. If the manufacturers cannot provide the armor he needs to survive, he will forge it with his own hands. Visualize a small, chaotic workspace, a cramped garage overflowing with snippets of nylon and piles of insulation. This is far from a pristine, high-tech research facility, but do not let the mess fool you. In this humble workshop, a fundamental revolution in high-altitude survival gear is about to ignite. Maurice recruits a partner in crime, the brilliant engineer André Van de Poot. Together they dive into the work, the room filling with floating goose down and the sharp chemical scent of synthetic adhesives. They toil away like mad tailors stitching late into the night, but make no mistake, they aren't making business suits. They are engineering life support systems, spacesuits designed for earthbound astronauts preparing to walk into the freezing void. Their primary adversary is invisible but deadly cold spots. These occur at the stitch seams, where the fabric is pinched together, creating a gateway for the biting wind to leach precious warmth from the core in mere seconds. Andre hits the drawing board determined to solve this thermal puzzle. He abandons the traditional quilted patterns used by everyone else and pioneers something radical, the H-box system. Think of the construction like a masonry wall. However, instead of heavy clay bricks, imagine rectangular chambers stuffed to the brim with high loft goose down. These chambers are separated not by stitches that touch the skin, but by vertical fabric walls. This ingenious architecture prevents the insulation from shifting or clumping, ensuring that the climber is encased in a continuous, unbroken force field of trapped warm air. Yet insulation is only half the battle. The other half is mobility. Maurice knows intimately how the human body struggles at extreme altitudes. When the simple act of raising an ice axe requires a Herculean effort of will, you cannot afford to have your clothing fighting against you. To solve this, they engineer an anatomical cut, a design that respects the biomechanics of a climber in motion. They essentially sculpt the garment to mirror the posture of an athlete mid-climb. The elbows are articulated, the knees pre-bent. This ensures that when a climber reaches for a hold, the fabric doesn't stretch tight across the skin, which would compress the capillaries. Preserving blood flow is non-negotiable up there because at 8,000 meters, compromised circulation leads directly to catastrophic frostbite and amputation. From this rigorous research, the non-ox philosophy comes to life, specialized equipment tailored for the lunatics who dare to climb without a mask. Barrard's reasoning is stark and scientifically sound. When you forego supplemental oxygen, your physiology changes. Your blood turns into sludge, your metabolic fire dims to a flicker, and your body effectively goes into shutdown mode, ceasing to generate internal heat. When the mercury plummets to minus 40 degrees, that down suit is the solitary barrier keeping you from freezing solid. The culmination of their frantic innovation and sleepless nights is the birth of a new legend, Valandre. This isn't just another fashion brand slapping a logo on a jacket. It represents battle-hardened armor forged in the garage to withstand the harshest environments on Earth. They now possess a dual advantage, a superior climbing philosophy, and the technical hardware to back it up. They are ready to challenge the planet's most inhospitable zones. However, sewing the perfect suit in a warm room is one thing. Proving its worth is another. To validate their creation, they have to go out there and bet their lives on the stitching. Fast forward to 1980. The era of hypothesis is finished. We find ourselves standing at the foot of Gasherbrum 1. This is the 11th highest point on the globe, a remote brooding titan rising 8,080 meters into the stratosphere, hidden deep within the jagged heart of the Karakoram Range. This scene looks nothing like the massive expeditions of the past. There is no army of porters, no sprawling tent city. There is only a profound, haunting silence. We see a minuscule team appearing pitifully small against the crushing scale of the ice wall looming above them. Maurice Barrard has arrived to make a statement. But he isn't satisfied with just climbing the mountain. He has selected a route that remains untouched by human hands, the Southwest Ridge. It is a terrifyingly sharp spine of rock and ice that cuts straight into the heavens. Tied into the other end of his rope is Georges Narbeau. Together they are ascending with a velocity that seems reckless. If you examine the gear on their backs, you'll notice something striking. Their packs are stripped to the absolute bone. They carry only the items necessary for survival, fueled by an enormous reserve of audacity. This doesn't resemble a military siege. It looks like a special ops surgical strike. They aren't wasting time establishing heavy camps. They simply climb until their muscles fail or the sun sets digging in wherever the darkness finds them. This is the definition of alpine style, raw, exposed, and fast. With every boot placement on that pristine, untouched snow, they validate their theory. The revolutionary lightweight gear is holding up. They remain warm yet agile, keeping pace ahead of the deadly weather windows. Meanwhile, far below at base camp, we find Liliane peering anxiously through her binoculars. For this specific ascent, she has remained behind, not joining the final push to the top. Though she is officially support, her burden is arguably heavier. Picture the agonizing suspense she endures. Through the lenses, she watches two insignificant dots struggling against a vertical mile of ice, fully aware that a sudden gust or a misplaced step could sweep them into oblivion. She is their anchor, their only connection to the living world below. She acts as their mission control and their silent guardian. For Liliane, the minutes drag by like hours, the waiting far more torturous than the physical act of climbing. Her gaze is locked onto that ridgeline. She scrutinizes their rhythm, tracks the menacing swirl of the clouds, and in her mind, she is up there taking every treacherous step in unison with Maurice. Suddenly, the dots stop moving upwards. They have reached the apex. Maurice and Georges stand triumphant atop Gasherbrum, one having unlocked a route that no human had ever mastered. They have achieved what the establishment called a suicide mission for a two-man team. For Maurice, the taste of this victory is far more intoxicating than the finest vintage champagne. This is not merely about bagging another peak. It serves as undeniable evidence that the dinosaurs of siege-style mountaineering are extinct. He comes down from the mountain with a solidified belief speed equals survival. His radical vision for lightweight fast ascent climbing isn't some distant futuristic concept. It is the new reality, and it has arrived today. Most families gather for reunions around a turkey dinner or a backyard barbecue, not in the death zone where the air is too thin to sustain life. But the Barrards are not most families. Their definition of a getaway involves ice axes and crampons. The calendar flips to 1982, and the backdrop remains the unforgiving high Himalayas. We return to the jagged teeth of the Karakoram Range. The objective this season is Gasherbrum 2, the towering neighbor that scrapes the sky at 8,035 meters. However, the team dynamic has evolved. Maurice is no longer leaving Liliane at base camp to watch through the lenses. She is gearing up, tightening her crampons and tying into the rope shoulder to shoulder with her husband, and the roster has expanded. Meet the third member of this audacious venture, Alain Bontemps. He isn't just a climbing partner, he is Liliane's own brother. This has transcended a typical climbing squad. It is a full-blown family clan, waging war against gravity. The risks are exponentially higher now. If the mountain unleashes its fury, it won't just take a team, it will wipe out an entire lineage in a single stroke. We watch them ascend, and their signature style remains intact, rapid, aggressive, and unencumbered. There are no oxygen masks obscuring their expressions. They are inhaling an atmosphere so devoid of oxygen, it practically mimics the vacuum of space, yet they continue to power upward with shocking speed. Liliane, often dismissed by critics as merely the shadow trailing her famous husband, is silencing every doubter. She attacks the route with formidable efficiency. She demands no assistance, hauls her own gear, and strategizes on equal footing with the men. With every meter she gains, she is systematically dismantling the archaic stereotype that women are the weaker sex in high-altitude alpinism. Brother, sister, husband, wife, the labels dissolve into a singular, cohesive unit. They operate like a precision instrument bound together by a trust far stronger than the nylon ropes connecting their harnesses. Finally, the slope levels out. The moment of truth arrives. The trio stands together at the very top of the world. Surrounded only by the deep indigo sky and the jagged crowns of fellow 8,000ers, they celebrate a flawless victory. They make their descent as conquering heroes, but upon their return, they encounter a force as powerful as the weather, the press. The media instantly devours their story. Images of the photogenic couple beaming against a canvas of sparkling glacial ice begin to splash across magazine covers and newspapers globally. The public doesn't see the frost nip or the crushing exhaustion. They see radiant golden gods of the mountains. This ascent is the turning point that cements their status as the undisputed rock stars of the alpinist world. Corporate sponsors begin clamoring for their endorsement. A polished, almost Hollywood narrative takes shape, the perfect couple introducing warmth and love to a frozen wasteland that typically offers only death. To the fascinated public, they transform into living proof that romance can thrive even in the most hostile environments Earth has to offer. The Barrards have transcended sport. They are now a global brand. This commercial success unlocks the funding for their wildest dreams. They begin to look at the blank spots on the map, the peaks that statistics suggest are death sentences, especially for women, places that nature seems to have posted with "do not enter" signs. Nanga Parbat is exactly that kind of forbidden territory. The year moves to 1984. Fresh off their triumphs on the Gasherbrums, the Barrards are hungry for something harder, something darker. Their gaze locks onto a monster rising 8,126 meters into the clouds. In climbing circles, this mountain is whispered about with dread. It earns its nickname, honestly, the Killer Mountain. For decades, it held the gruesome title for the highest fatality rate, claiming lives with a veracity that made Everest look tame. The walls are sheer, the avalanches are unpredictable and massive, and the weather shifts from calm to catastrophic in the blink of an eye. This is not merely a pile of rock and ice. It is a vertical labyrinth designed to chew up the world's strongest climbers and spit them out broken. Undeterred by the ghosts of the past, Maurice and Liliane march toward the base of the formidable Diamir Face, ready to dance with the giant. Imagine a vertical nightmare that stretches for miles, a sheer wall of rock and ice that shoots straight up from the earth and pierces the stratosphere. This is one of the longest, most punishing mountain faces on the planet. For this team, the standard tourist routes are irrelevant. They have no interest in following well-trodden paths. True to their purest philosophy, they are carving their own unique line up the mountain, and they are doing it the hard way, climbing without supplemental oxygen and traveling fast and light, carrying only the barest essentials. However, this particular ascent feels different. The air itself seems to vibrate with a unique electric tension. You have to understand the stakes. Until this moment, no woman in the history of our species had ever successfully stood on the summit of Nanga Parbat. It felt as though the mountain was a sentient beast actively pushing back, rejecting any attempt to integrate a female climber into its rugged, exclusively male fraternity. Focus your attention on Liliane now. She has completely transcended the role of a supportive spouse. She is no longer just following. She is the tip of the spear leading the charge. On the terrifying Diamir Face, where a single slip of a crampon means a fatal plunge into the abyss. Below, her technique is nothing short of mesmerizing, fluid, precise, and utterly confident. The screaming, icy winds threaten to peel them off the slope like stickers, and the dangerously thin air begins to cloud their judgment, triggering vivid hallucinations in the death zone. Yet Liliane refuses to falter. She keeps driving her body upward. She is rewriting the history books in real time. Her diminutive figure, contrasted against that colossal, indifferent wall of ice, seems to defy every logical rule of survival. And then finally, only a few meters remain. Liliane Barrard takes that last agonizing step and stands tall on the roof of the world. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. She is the very first woman to ever gaze out at the curvature of the earth from the summit of Nanga Parbat and actually return to tell the story. This single moment shifts the paradigm of mountaineering forever. If there were ever skeptics whispering in the shadows that her success was merely a byproduct of her husband's skills, those voices are now silenced permanently. Liliane has cemented her place among the global elite of alpinists, irrespective of gender. She has proven that her endurance knows no bounds. Upon their descent to base camp, you can witness a transformation. There is a new steely confidence burning behind her eyes. She has unlocked a realization: there is no height she cannot conquer. That sensation of personal power and agency is more intoxicating than the finest wine. Liliane and Maurice are now at the absolute zenith of their capabilities, believing they have finally cracked the enigma of survival in the high Himalayas. They feel invincible. 30 meters, a mere 30 meters stood between them and the summit. Yet that short distance feels more vast and insurmountable than the entire journey from France to the Himalayas. We are back in the spring of 1986. This was meant to be the prelude just a couple of months before the main event. But the setting shifts dramatically. We find ourselves at Makalu, known as the Black Giant, the fifth highest mountain on Earth. Maurice and Liliane are teetering on the very edge of glory. The summit is agonizingly close, so close it feels like you could reach out and graze it with a gloved hand or toss a snowball onto its peak. But at that critical juncture, nature decides to remind them who is truly in command. A storm of monstrous proportions slams into the ridge with the force of a freight train. The wind is so ferocious it doesn't just knock you off your feet. It suffocates you, stopping you from even drawing a breath. It forms an invisible, impenetrable wall that even the most ironclad human will cannot breach. The situation becomes a deadly set of scales weighing two impossible options. On one side of the scale, years of grueling training, their burning ambition, and those precious, taunting 30 meters. On the other side, certain instant death, either from the freezing void or a catastrophic fall. Maurice makes the only logical decision, though it is a heartbreaking one. They turn their backs on the summit. Retreating with the goal in plain sight takes far more courage than continuing the climb. However, that retreat leaves a profound psychological wound. It is the corrosive effect of unfinished business. The human mind simply refuses to accept that all that suffering was for nothing. Instead of returning home to rest and heal their battered bodies, they make a fatal calculation. They immediately shift their entire focus to the next target, K2. But take a close look at their physical condition. The human body is not a machine. You cannot simply drain the oil and replace the parts. Attempting two 8,000-meter peaks in a single season places an unimaginable load on the physiology. The failed attempt on Makalu had already incinerated their energy reserves, leaving them running on empty. Their muscles are depleted and exhausted, their blood has thickened into a sludge from the prolonged exposure to high altitude, and their nervous systems are stretched, taut, vibrating like a guitar string about to snap. They are not arriving in Pakistan as rested peak performance athletes. They are arriving as desperate souls seeking redemption. At this stage, K2 ceases to be just a mountain to climb. It transforms into a mechanism for closure, a desperate bid to prove to themselves and to the watching world that their failure on Makalu was nothing more than a fluke of nature. They view the second highest peak in the world as the only path to wash away the bitterness of that spring disaster. This unquenchable thirst for a comeback is actively dulling their survival instincts. They are preparing to engage with the deadliest mountain on the planet while carrying the heavy burden of deep exhaustion and a bruised ego forces that are pushing them to ignore the screaming warning signs from their own bodies. A dream worth a fortune could vanish into the ether forever, left on the backseat of a dusty, battered taxi, and it is in this mundane moment, not with the first swing of an ice axe on the glacier, that the tragedy of their K2 expedition truly begins. We find ourselves in Rawalpindi. It is June 1986. The heat is oppressive and suffocating. The city roars with life, humming with traffic and reeking of gasoline fumes. This is the chaotic backdrop where a unique Franco-Polish alliance is formed. Just look at the caliber of this team. Alongside our protagonists, Maurice and Liliane, the group is bolstered by Michel Parmentier, a journalist and a climber of formidable skill. Rounding out this quartet is the legendary Wanda Rutkiewicz, known as the Iron Lady of Polish mountaineering. It is a veritable dream team, a global all-star lineup where every single member is a living legend in the climbing community. With a squad of professionals this caliber, what could possibly go wrong but disaster strikes from the blind side? Maurice Barrard, the man renowned for his ice-cold composure and meticulous obsessive planning, steps out of a taxi and simply walks away, leaving a bag behind. And this isn't just a bag of clothes. It contains the lifeblood of the expedition, massive stacks of cash, the climbing permits, their passports, and return tickets. The entire logistical backbone, every plan, and the team's immediate future is sitting in a worn-out bag, speeding away into the labyrinth of this sprawling Asian megacity headed for God knows where. For the next few agonizing hours, the group is plunged into a state of absolute shock. Imagine that sickening, sinking feeling of dread in your gut. You are standing on the precipice of the greatest adventure of your life, yet you are utterly powerless. Without those papers and that currency, they are nobodies. Just a group of stranded tourists lost in Pakistan. You can physically see the atmosphere shift in their expressions. Wanda Rutkiewicz, a woman accustomed to iron-fisted discipline, stares at her leader in total disbelief. Michelle is chain-smoking nervously. Liliane attempts to maintain a brave face, but the tension in the air is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Of course, fate decides to grant them a second chance. Against all odds, they manage to recover the bag, a 1 in a million miracle. The money and the documents are all accounted for. They can finally exhale, but the damage has been done. The psychological atmosphere within the team has been irrevocably altered. This incident manifests as the first hairline fracture in the foundation of their trust. The team members are left grappling with a silent, gnawing question. If their leader can lose his mind and fall apart, in the safety of a city, what is going to happen up there in the death zone, where a single error costs not your wallet, but your life? The invisible thread of Maurice's authority has been stretched to its absolute breaking point. Instead of unity and a singular fighting spirit, they are now hauling a new kind of baggage to base camp, a heavy burden of doubt and unspoken resentment. Financially, the expedition has been salvaged. But psychologically, the engine is already starting to stall before they have even laid eyes on the mountain. Imagine being trapped inside a fragile nylon cage while a freight train thunders past mere inches from your face. That is exactly what a storm sounds like on the upper slopes of K2. The calendar has turned to late June. Any lingering doubts from the chaos in Rawalpindi quickly evaporate, replaced by the harsh, brutal reality of the climb. The team leaves the relative luxury of base camp and begins their ascent. Remember their guiding principle: no high-altitude porters. That ethos might sound noble and romantic in a press interview, but out here on the unforgiving ice, it means one thing: brutal, back-breaking labor. Maurice, Liliane, Wanda, and Michelle effectively transform into their own pack mules. They are the ones hauling the heavy tents, the stoves, the food rations, and the ropes. Every single step upward is a violent battle against gravity, amplified by the crushing weight of their packs. They are burning a colossal amount of calories just to drag their bodies and their gear up to 7,000 meters, and that is precisely when the mountain decides to spring its trap. The sky turns a menacing shade of gray. The barometric pressure plummets like a stone, and then the blizzard hits with full force. This is not merely a snowstorm. It is a complete whiteout, a solid wall of white that hermetically seals them off from the rest of the universe. They are pinned down, trapped at 7,000 meters in a swirling void. In a normal life, 9 days is a short vacation. But up here in the thin, oxygen-deprived air, 9 days of forced inactivity is a slow-motion execution. At first, it might feel like a welcome break, a chance to rest muscles. But that is a dangerous illusion. At this extreme altitude, the human body does not recover. Even while lying perfectly still in a sleeping bag, simply breathing requires effort. Your body is working overtime, fighting for every single molecule of the desperately scarce oxygen. A silent, terrifying biological process kicks in, the body begins to cannibalize itself. The very muscles they have spent years training start to burn away, metabolized by the body just to keep the vital organs functioning. The tension inside the tents is ratcheting up to unbearable levels. You have 4 powerful alpha personalities trapped in a space so cramped they cannot even stand up or stretch. Outside, the wind is howling with a sound that drowns out all rational thought. Inside, a different kind of storm is brewing pure anxiety. Their food supplies are running critically low. They are forced to ration the fuel needed to melt snow for water. Instead of building strength for the final push to the summit, they are growing markedly weaker by the hour. That deep-seated, bone-weary fatigue from the Makalu expedition, the one they had tried so hard to suppress, comes roaring back with a vengeance. So by the time the wind finally dies down and the sun illuminates the slopes once more, the people who crawl out of the tents are not well-rested athletes. They are haggard, hollowed-out prisoners of the mountain. The storm didn't just steal hours from their schedule, it acted like a thief in the night, robbing them of their deepest physical reserves and mental sharpness. Now they are staring down the barrel of an impossible ultimatum retreat to base camp and sacrifice weeks of hard-earned acclimatization, or roll the dice and push upward toward the death zone while running on absolute fumes. K2 has already landed a devastating first blow without the climbers even touching the summit ridge. The mountain simply played the waiting game, allowing the passage of time and the crushing lack of oxygen to do the heavy lifting. It changes people. Have you ever watched your closest friends, people you trust with your life, suddenly morph into complete strangers when the stakes rise to life or death? That is exactly the eerie, unsettling reality unfolding on June 18th as the team gears up for their final assault. As they trudge out of camp, the fluid athletic grace they flaunted weeks ago is gone. It has been replaced by a stiff, mechanical shuffle like watching a reel of old film played at half speed. You only need to look at their gear to see that something is wrong. Their ropes remain coiled tight and clipped to their packs, totally unused. Maurice and Liliane Barrard, usually the poster children for climbing synergy, are ascending completely untethered. It is a flagrant violation of every safety protocol in mountaineering. But at this extreme altitude, the brain's logic centers begin to warp and fail. A rope represents security, sure, but up here it also represents dead weight and a frustrating shackle to your partner's sluggish pace. After being trapped in a nylon cage for 9 days, they are so desperate for freedom that they are subconsciously trying to shed every single ounce of burden, even if that burden is the lifeline connecting them to the person they love most. So they climb in isolation, drifting apart across the vast white slope like a broken necklace. We are now pushing past 7,400 meters. At this elevation, every lungful of air contains only 1/3 of the oxygen found at sea level. And then the mountain delivers a sign, a warning so loud it should have sounded like a screaming air raid siren. Liliane Barrard, the elite athlete who was practically sprinting up peaks earlier in the season, suddenly grinds to a complete halt before a serac. It is a standard wall of ice, an obstacle a climber of her caliber should dismantle in 30, maybe 40 minutes at the absolute most. But Liliane is pinned down. We watch her kicking her crampons into the bulletproof ice over and over, but there is no power behind the blows. She simply lacks the explosive strength to haul her body weight up. Her movements are jerky and confused. 1 hour bleeds away, then 2, then 3. 4 agonizing hours. She wastes 4 precious hours battling a single vertical section, incinerating daylight, and burning through her last reserves of glycogen. It is a catastrophic mismanagement of resources. In the high-stakes world of Himalayan mountaineering, there is a golden rule. If you are moving this slowly at the start of a summit, push, you are not heading for glory. You are walking into a grave. It comes down to the brutal mathematics of survival. And you have to ask, where is Maurice? He is watching this unfold. As the expedition leader and her husband, the burden is on him to make the hard call. Every flashing red light is screaming abort because Liliane's body is shutting down. But hypoxia is a master of deception. It dulls your fear response and cripples your critical thinking, narrowing your entire universe down to a single obsessive command: go up. Maurice remains silent. Nobody speaks the only words that matter. We are turning around. Instead of making the tough decision that could save their lives, the group ignores the evidence and presses on. They are willfully blinding themselves to reality, praying for a miraculous second wind, or hoping that sheer grit can override biological collapse. They step right over the line of safety and crawl upward, entering a zone where rescue is impossible. Let me ask you, have you ever tried to sleep with 3 other adults in the back seat of a tiny compact car? While that car is parked inside an industrial deep freezer, because that is an accurate description of the night before our hero's greatest triumph. It is June 22nd. The group has dragged their exhausted bodies up to 8,300 meters. They have reached the infamous bottleneck, a narrow, terrifying chute of ice sitting directly beneath a towering, unstable glacier shelf. The air is so thin here that a match flame would instantly snuff out. Every motion requires a deliberate mental battle, and right here on a precarious ledge, chopped out of the ice, they make a decision that defies all sanity. They pitch a single tent, one solitary 2-person tent, to house 4 full-grown adults wearing bulky, high-altitude suits. But the cramping isn't the most shocking part. If you looked inside their packs, you would find them empty. In their obsession with alpine-style speed, they left their sleeping bags down below. It is a radical, dangerous gamble, saving a few kilograms of pack weight at the expense of survival warmth. Their entire strategy hinges on blind faith in their gear. Maurice and Liliane are convinced their high-tech Valandre down suits are invincible. The plan sounds borderline suicidal: survive the night by huddling together like penguins fully dressed in their climbing gear. But a night exposed on K2 shows no mercy. As soon as the sun drops behind the ridge, the temperature crashes instantly to 30 degrees below zero. Inside that tiny nylon shell, a hellish game of human Tetris begins. Maurice, Liliane, Wanda, and Michelle fight for millimeters of space just to expand their chests enough to breathe. There is no room to extend legs, no room to lie flat. They are forced to sit upright, contorted into a painful knot of limbs. The glacial cold radiates up through the thin floor, bypassing their insulation and gnawing at their bones. Their down suits are technical marvels, yes, but they rely on loft. When you compress them by sitting on them, they become useless sheets of fabric. This is not rest before a summit bid. This is active torture. Instead of recharging, their bodies are incinerating massive amounts of calories just to maintain core temperature. Their hearts are hammering against their ribs, struggling to push sludge-thick blood through constricted veins. Every tiny adjustment by one person sends waves of irritation and pain through the others. The psychological pressure inside this claustrophobic trap is reaching a breaking point. When the first weak rays of sunlight finally hit the tent fabric, it is not a team of elite athletes who unzip the door. It is 4 hollowed-out shadows who crawl into the light. They are severely dehydrated. Their muscles are locked with lactic acid, and their brains are fogged by severe sleep deprivation and oxygen starvation. Their light and fast strategy has backfired in the worst way possible. They saved energy on the climb up, sure, but they paid for it by losing their entire physical bank account in a single night of shivering misery. After that night, from hell squeezed into an icy coffin of a tent, the sunrise arrives with a mocking, serene beauty. It is the early morning of June 23rd. It feels as if the mountain is apologizing for the violence of the previous storms. The wind vanishes completely, leaving a dead calm. The sky is a piercing, saturated ultramarine, and visibility stretches for miles. This is one of K2's rarest offerings, a perfect weather window. It should be the stage for a triumphant march. But watch how they move. The 3 French climbers, Maurice, Liliane, and Michelle, stumble out of the tent. moving with the sluggishness of a dream sequence. That freezing, sleepless ordeal has siphoned off their drive. However, there is one person in the group who refuses to surrender to the fatigue. Wanda Rutkiewicz. The legendary Polish mountaineer seems to activate a hidden reserve of power. She refuses to wait for the group to get their act together. While the French climbers are still groggily trying to rub the stiffness out of their frozen limbs, Wanda is already geared up and moving. She breaks formation. In this moment, the team dynamic dissolves. She is a lone warrior now. Her pace is shocking. At an altitude where most people take 10 breaths for a single step, she falls into a steady, relentless rhythm. She can feel the weight of history pushing her forward. This isn't just a competition against other climbers. It is a race against her own biological clock. We watch her tiny silhouette shrinking against the vast, blinding white backdrop of the summit dome. She conquers the final vertical meters of the bottleneck and starts the last traverse toward the top. And then it happens. Sometime between 10:15 and 11 in the morning, Wanda Rutkiewicz takes one last heavy step and finds there is no more mountain to climb. She is standing on a point where the only thing above her is the stratosphere. She has reached the summit of K2. Let the magnitude of this sink in. Up until this second, the second highest point on Earth was an exclusive boys' club. Wanda smashes that glass ceiling to pieces. She stands there as the first woman in the history of our species to conquer the savage mountain. She stands there in solitary glory, bathed in harsh sunlight, proving once and for all that the concept of the weaker sex is nothing but a fragile stereotype. But watch what she does next. Wanda reaches into her pocket and pulls out a scrap of paper and a pencil. She is preparing a summit note, a small proof of passage she intends to bury under a flat rock. She scrawls her own name, and then she does something deeply moving and hauntingly eerie. Right next to her name, she carefully writes the name of Liliane Barrard. But here's the thing, Liliane is not on the summit. She is still far below, fighting a losing battle against exhaustion and thin air. Yet Wanda is either so confident in her friend's strength, or perhaps so desperate to share this lonely victory, that she inscribes Liliane into the history books before she even arrives. She wedges the note under a stone, reserving a spot for Liliane, not just in the records, but in eternity. Wanda waits on the peak for nearly an hour, scanning the ridge below, but the white horizon remains empty. No French team appears. Realizing that staying any longer is a death sentence, she begins her descent, leaving the summit silent once more. The mountain waits for the next act of the tragedy. You have to understand, triumph at the cruising altitude of a Boeing 747 rarely looks like a party. It usually looks like a desperate gasping struggle just to keep your heart beating. Finally, a full 30 minutes after Wanda Rutkiewicz has left, 3 exhausted figures crawl onto the summit plateau. Maurice, Liliane, and Michel have arrived. They made it. But if you are picturing high fives and joyful hugs erase that image, look closely at their faces, obscured by dark glacier goggles and masks of frost. They resemble the tragic masks of ancient Greek theater, frozen in grimaces of absolute depletion. Liliane Barrard officially etches her name into reality. She is now the second woman on Earth to stand on the summit of K2. What makes this feat even more mind-bending is that the entire 4-person squad pulled it off without a single canister of supplemental oxygen. This was the holy grail of mountaineering, the pure style that Maurice had been chasing his whole life. But nature has a cruel way of collecting debts, and the cost for this purity would turn out to be catastrophic. Up here at 8,611 meters, the air is so devastatingly thin that the human brain begins to glitch, processing reality with a terrifying delay, much like an ancient computer trying to run modern software, sputtering just before it crashes completely. Standing on the summit, the climbers fumble with their gear to retrieve their cameras, desperate to capture proof of their conquest. You hear the mechanical click of a shutter, then another, preserving these fleeting moments for posterity. They snap the photos that are supposed to grace glossy magazine covers, the triumphant unfurling of sponsor flags, and a panorama so majestic it literally steals the little breath they have left. Sprawled out beneath their boots, the entire Karakoram range reveals itself a jagged frozen frontier separating China and Pakistan, looking like an endless ocean of razor-sharp white peaks. But the tragedy is that they have absolutely zero energy left to appreciate the majesty of it all. Their bodies are in a state of critical dehydration. The blood coursing through their veins has thickened into a sludge consistency like cold syrup, forcing their hearts to work doubly hard just to push it through their failing systems. Every single second they waste loitering here on the absolute roof of the planet inches them closer to permanent physiological damage. Deep down, they know the old climber's adage, the summit is only halftime. Getting to the top is optional, but getting down is mandatory, and usually the descent is the deadlier half of the game. There is no fist-pumping euphoria here. There is only the crushing, heavy realization that the hardest part of the journey has just begun. The sun, which had briefly tricked them into feeling a phantom warmth, is already beginning its traitorous slide toward the western horizon. As the light shifts, the temperature plummets instantly, and long skeletal shadows begin to stretch across the snowfields. This is the mountain's way of telling them the window is closing. It is their cue to move or die. Reluctantly, the group turns their backs on the summit and begins the agonizingly long down-climb, aiming for that singular tiny tent perched precariously at 8,300 meters. Descending requires a level of laser focus they no longer possess. Their legs are completely hollowed out, empty of power, and their motor coordination is misfiring badly. The very same gravity that fought them tooth and nail on the ascent is now conspiring to drag them down the mountain far too quickly. They stumble along like zombies consumed by a singular obsessive desire, just one sip of liquid and the chance to collapse. They are retreating back into the heart of the death zone, returning to the exact same bivouac that failed to give them any meaningful rest the night before. And now they are staring down the barrel of yet another night without sleeping bags, only this time they are physically shattered beyond repair. Have you ever been so exhausted that you willingly walked into a trap simply because lifting your foot to step away from it felt impossible? That is the level of fatigue we are talking about. That is precisely the nightmare scenario unfolding on the evening of June 23rd, as the team stumbles one by one back into the tent. They have made it back to 8,300 meters. You might think the worst is behind them, but in reality, they are crawling inside a tiger's cage and locking the door. Every instinct in Mountaineering 101 is screaming a single command: descend, get down now. Every minute spent idling at this altitude is slowly killing them. But Maurice Barrard, the veteran leader who should know better, makes a call that feels like salvation but is actually a death warrant. He looks at the group and says, "We're staying." He insists on spending a second night in the death zone. Just look at Wanda and Michelle. They don't push back. They simply do not have the caloric energy left to form an argument. Their willpower has been paralyzed by a crushing, bone-deep exhaustion, and the mere idea of closing their eyes feels like a gift from the gods. But in that moment, the oppressive silence inside the nylon tent is broken. Not by the howling wind outside, but by a terrifying lack of sound coming from their gear. The gas stove sits there silent and cold. The canisters are bone dry. They have completely run out of fuel. To a layperson, this might sound like a minor inconvenience, but at 8,000 meters, it is effectively a death sentence. No fuel means you cannot melt snow. And if you cannot melt snow, you have absolutely no source of water. Without water, a human body in the death zone begins to desiccate rapidly, effectively mummifying, while the heart is still beating. They try desperately to chew on chips of raw ice, but it consumes more body heat than it provides hydration. The thirst evolves into an agonizing form of torture. Their bodies, already beaten down by the assault on the summit, have just slammed into a physiological brick wall. A horrific biological process begins to take hold inside them. The blood in their veins thickens further, turning into a viscous, sludge-like substance resembling engine oil sitting in a freezer. The heart is forced into overdrive, straining violently to pump this sludge through narrowing vessels, pushing the cardiovascular system to its breaking point. Their extremities begin to freeze from the inside out as the body pulls all remaining heat to the core, sacrificing fingers and toes to keep the organs alive. But the most immediate danger is happening inside their skulls. Starved of oxygen by that thick, slow-moving blood, the brain tissue itself begins to swell against the skull. The fabric of reality begins to fray at the edges. Critical thinking capabilities simply evaporate. They sit huddled together in that cramped, freezing space with no sleeping bags, shivering violently from a cold that seems to bypass the skin and sink right into the marrow. This isn't sleep they are drifting into. It is a descent into a hypoxic, comatose stupor. They are pinning all their hopes on the morning sun, praying it will bring relief and warmth. But the brutal truth is that this single night without water has triggered an irreversible chain reaction of biological collapse. Their bodies are shutting down, system by system, like a power grid failing city block by city block. By the time sunrise finally breaks, they won't be a team of elite mountaineers anymore. They will be three husks of human beings teetering on the razor's edge of existence, where even lifting a hand demands a superhuman act of willpower. The brilliant, cloudless blue sky hanging above K2 is the cruelest lie nature can possibly tell. Because on this mountain, the end always arrives without warning. The morning of June 24th dawns, and with it the fragile illusion of safety is shattered into a million pieces. The wind, which had mercifully slept through the night, now awakens with a furious, terrifying violence. In the blink of an eye, the sky is choked with heavy lead-gray clouds, and the climber's worst nightmare begins a whiteout. This isn't just snow falling from the sky. The wind is blasting loose powder up from the ground, hitting you from all 360 degrees. The horizon doesn't just fade, it evaporates completely. You reach a point where you can no longer distinguish the white sky from the white ground. In this swirling, icy chaos, the group cohesion starts to fracture. Michel Parmentier is the first to snap out of the trance. A primal, reptilian instinct for survival takes over. He realizes with chilling clarity that waiting for the others means dying right here. Michel plunges headfirst into the swirling white void, desperately hunting for the route down to the next camp, before the storm erases his tracks completely. He pushes forward his figure, quickly dissolving into a blurry, ghostly silhouette. Wanda Rutkiewicz is right on his heels, moving slower, battling violent gusts of wind that threaten to pick her up and hurl her into the abyss. But then at some indefinable moment, perhaps triggered by pure intuition, she stops and glances back over her shoulder. Wanda sees them. It is the last time any human being will ever see Maurice and Liliane Barrard alive. The couple is falling behind, separated from the pack. They are moving with agonizing slowness, as if they are wading through invisible molasses. Severe dehydration and 2 consecutive nights spent above 8,000 meters have rendered their movements heavy and clumsy. They are stumbling blindly through the mist, leaning on each other for support, but their pace is dropping catastrophically. The gap between the survivors in the front and the doomed couple in the back widens with every ticking second. 10 meters becomes 20, then 50. Wanda wants to scream, to yell at them to hurry, but the wind smothers every sound, leaving her throat effectively stuffing her mouth with snow. She watches helplessly as the figures of Maurice and Liliane grow fainter and fainter in the swirling storm. First, the bright colors of their gear disappear into the gray. Then the outlines of their bodies fade. Finally, the white curtain of the storm drops between them for good closing, like the final act of a tragic play. Visual contact is broken. In this howling chaos, the Barrards are now completely alone, cut off from the only moving landmarks leading them to safety. They will never make it down to base camp. The story of their ambitious climb simply dissolves into the blizzard, disappearing right along with their fading shapes. In a windstorm of this magnitude, a boot print stamped into the snow lasts for exactly 10 seconds before it is scrubbed from the face of the earth forever. That is exactly how long K2 gives you to make a decision before it seals your fate. And for the Barrards, that timer has just hit 0. Inside a whiteout, the very concept of three-dimensional space disappears, leaving you in a void. For Maurice and Liliane, their entire universe has now shrunk to the small bubble of space they can reach with an outstretched arm. They try desperately to find the tracks left by Wanda and Michel, but all they see is a clean, untouched sheet of ice. The hurricane-force wind acts like a giant eraser, wiping away any hope of navigation. In these conditions, your inner ear and sense of balance go completely haywire. Climbers call it the ping-pong ball effect. You are suspended in pure white nothingness. There is no up, no down, no horizon line. Your brain, already starved of oxygen, literally cannot tell your feet where to step, whether it is onto solid ice or into thin air. And this is where the cruel physics of their earlier choices come into play. Remember that rope they coiled up and put away to move faster in pure style. That decision has now mutated into a death sentence. If they were roped together, a slip by one could have been arrested by the other. That rope represents the ultimate safety net, a physical lifeline connecting you to the world. But they are entirely on their own, in zero visibility and on steep, treacherous terrain. One wrong placement of a foot, a single crampon point slipping on a glaze of blue ice, turns into an uncontrollable slide. There is no one to haul on a safety rope, no one to dig in and stop the fall. It is just the two of them alone together in the heart of a raging monster. We do not get to witness the fall itself, but the mountain, it tells the story for us later through cold, hard forensic facts. Liliane's body would eventually be discovered at the very foot of the wall on the glacier, a staggering 3,000 meters below where they were last seen. For the investigators, the location of her body is irrefutable proof of what happened. It means they didn't simply freeze to death while waiting for help on the slope. They didn't drift into an eternal sleep inside a snow cave. They fell. Most likely, their exhausted muscles finally gave out, or the treacherous ground simply crumbled beneath their weight. In that split second, gravity takes hold, hurling their bodies down an icy chute. The speed builds instantly. With no ice axe in hand and zero strength left to self-arrest, there is almost no chance of clinging to the slope. The tragedy unfolds in a flash, perhaps without even a scream, and if there was one, it would have been swallowed instantly by the roaring wind. Their brilliant careers and their partnership weren't cut short by a massive avalanche or a rockfall, but by simple disorientation. A kill and the absence of that one vital lifeline they had sacrificed in the name of speed. Sometimes surviving the mountain is actually harder than being left there forever, because the survivors are the ones who have to walk down the rest of the way, carrying the heavy burden of the news that their friends are gone. Wanda Rutkiewicz and Michel Parmentier somehow managed to cheat the Reaper in a high-stakes gamble against the elements emerging as the sole survivors of that catastrophic expedition. They stumbled back down to the lower camps, completely shattered, their bodies ravaged by deep frostbite and their physical reserves drained to absolute zero. While the blackened skin on their faces and fingers would eventually heal, the haunting memories of that ferocious storm would stain their gaze for the rest of their lives, leaving psychological scars that no medicine could ever touch. As the survivors, they bore the heavy burden of being the last people to see the world's highest couple alive. Their report was chillingly brief and devastating whiteout conditions, howling gales, and a terrifying void where their friends used to be. K2 is a greedy landlord. It rarely evicts its tenants, immediately preferring to hold on to the fallen in its icy, unforgiving grip for as long as it chooses. For 3 long, agonizing weeks, the mountain offered nothing but silence, while the world waited for news. It wasn't until the weather finally broke that an Austrian team noticed a stark, colorful contrast against the snow at the very foot of the south face. It was Liliane. Gravity, in its cold indifference, had claimed her. Forensic analysis suggested she had plummeted from the death zone's ceiling, a fall so catastrophic that it extinguished any flicker of hope instantly. Her remains were laid to rest right there at the Gilkey Memorial, the somber, wind-scoured sanctuary dedicated to those who dared to duel with the savage mountain and lost. Today, her name is engraved on a simple metal plate joining a chorus of others that chime mournfully in the eternal wind, a permanent roll call of the fallen who stay on the mountain forever. Maurice, however, vanished into the white abyss, embarking on a much longer solitary voyage through the ice. Glaciers are essentially rivers, frozen in time, guarding their mysteries with jealous patience for decades. For 12 years, the world wondered where he lay. It was not until 1998, as the ice groaned and shifted, that the mountain decided it was finally time to return him to the surface. His body was discovered thousands of feet below the summit, identifiable only by the distinctive equipment he had stitched together with his own hands back home. There is a dark, twisting irony in this discovery. The protective suit he engineered had perfectly withstood a decade of glacial crushing and sub-zero temperatures, yet the climbing strategy he devised had cost him everything. When the news broke back in France, the loss of the star couple hit the climbing community with the force of an avalanche. But as the initial shock wore off, the tearful eulogies were swiftly replaced by sharp, probing interrogations. The same headlines that had celebrated their romance and bravery only 24 hours earlier suddenly turned critical, dissecting their every decision with ruthless hindsight. Experts and critics began to speculate on the dark side of professional mountaineering, asking if the Barrards had become victims of their own brand. Was the weight of sponsorship contracts and the lens of the camera so heavy that it forced them to keep climbing toward the summit when every survival instinct screamed for them to turn around and descend? Their tragic end has since evolved into a grim curriculum for every high-altitude climber. It established a cardinal rule written in blood: under no circumstances do you ever plan to spend a second consecutive night in the death zone. At that altitude, the human body ceases to function and begins to die. It is a physiological debt that nature simply does not allow you to repay. Yet the darkness of their story is illuminated by a lasting legacy that goes far beyond sorrow. Scan the slopes of the Himalayas today, and you will see elite alpinists clad in down suits proudly displaying the Valandre logo. The company Maurice started did not die on the mountain with him. It thrived, becoming a global standard bearer for safety and warmth. The engineering brilliance Barrard poured into his designs continues to shield climbers from the very same freezing hell that took his life. Their true monument isn't the metal plaque rattling in the wind beneath K2, it is the cutting-edge thermal technology that empowers human beings to endure conditions that belong on another planet. The saga of Maurice and Liliane remains a timeless warning. The mountains may occasionally tolerate great skill, but they are ancient, uncaring giants that will never ever submit to human ambition.